Hello again, and in this section we'll take a look at third move G6. So welcome to the video, and now we'll mention the main line against the Rossolimo, which is G6. And Black's idea is to find the bishop, take control of the dark squares on the long diagonal, and finish his development this way. So this variation has been always Black's best defense and main line against the Rossolimo. And in the last few years, it has been hotly contested. In the famous World Championship match in 2018, and thanks to that, this variation has been seeing a resurgence and has gained a lot of popularity tremendously with players of all levels. So in this course, I'm going to be recommending short castle. White's other main move here is bishop takes c6. When the position is very rich and complex, Black can take with either the d pawn or with the b pawn. Generally, White gets a very slightly better position, hoping that the position is easier to play for him. But at the same time, taking on c6 gives up a concession, so it surrenders the bishop pair. And it's not always the player's liking to give up the bishop pair so early on move 4. Of course, it does ruin Black's pawns slightly, but at the same time, the pawn on c5 is not vulnerable anytime soon. It's not going to be vulnerable. And at least personally, I don't have good results with bishop takes c6 on move 4, as I tend to miss the bishop here. So anyway, let's take a look at short castle, which is also very principled. And now Black plays bishop g7. And in this course, I'm going to be recommending the move c3. White has other moves here, such as rook e1, with the idea to take control of the e-file, or knight c3, and they're both very good. Alternatively, White can still take on c6 on this move, here on move 5. But each of those lines has their advantages and disadvantages, and so I suggest c3. Taking control of the d4 square and intending to build a solid pawn center with the move d4 quickly. In this position, Black has two main moves, and the first move is knight f6, attacking the pawn e4 and developing the knight. Alternatively, Black can play the move e5 with the idea to control the dark squares in the center, and this move has been Magnus Carlsen's choice in the games that he played, reaching the position after c3. So we'll pay serious attention to both moves. Let's see, Magnus Carlsen played this move twice? Or only once? Maybe he played it once. The other game was from the move order rook e1, where he also played e5. So it seems like he likes this setup this active setup with the pawn on e5, where, of course, it controls a lot of squares, the dark squares here, and in addition, Black can develop knight to e7 quickly and protect his other knight on c6. So, besides those two moves, Black has other alternatives such as queen b6 or a6, and this move is actually not that stupid, because Black encourages us to take on c6. We can play the quiet move bishop a4 with the idea to advance to the center, and this is also playable. But I think taking on c6 is fine. And here Black takes with the d pawn. And the idea is that if you play a quick d4, then after takes, Black creates counterplay on our center pawns. So after bishop takes c6, d takes c6, I like the move queen e2, and this is the most flexible choice for White. So obviously White has other moves. But this move seems very logical because white wants to play rook d1 next, and we take control of the d3 square and prevent black from playing queen d3. For example, if bishop g4, then after d3, we will recapture the bishop pair, and now knight bd2, so we can recapture after with the other knight. Takes, and the black's position is solid, but at the same time white is slightly better. Because we have the better pawn structure. And here after e4, white is threatening to push one square further and fix black's queenside pawns. Meanwhile, after e5, we get an outpost on the c4 square, and white's position is just a bit better. Our knight is well placed, and in addition we can consider advancing our f pawn those squares to activate our bishop. Knight f6 looks more natural, and here we can play h3, preventing the annoying pin on bishop g4. And now we want to occupy the center with d4 next move. After castle d4, and if black takes, then after recapturing, black's bishop on c8 doesn't have a good square at the moment, and meanwhile we are ready to occupy the center by playing knight c3. Followed by rook d1. Black can turn knight d7 to control the dark squares, but after bishop e3 and knight c3, white is slightly better here, thanks to our control over the dark squares, and also black's bishop on c8 is quite passive at the moment, so rook ad1 is coming, and black has to be careful. On move 5, queen b6 is a possible alternative here. When white has two good replies, bishop a4 is fine. Alternatively, knight a3 is also possible, just developing the knight and protecting the bishop, and later white can occupy the center with d4. For example, after knight f6, e5, this has been played in the recent game, Silva against Almeida, and after bishop c4 attacking the knight, followed by d4, white occupied the center, and black's queen on b6 looks misplaced. Alternatively, bishop a4 is also fine. Again, white wants to occupy the center, and if black develops the knight, then now is a good time to meet this with e5. a4 takes, and here, besides the auto capture c takes d4, where black is able to develop and support the knight with bishop e6. So actually in this position, white plays bishop b3 first, attacking the knight on d5 and forcing him to retreat. So this is very important because if you take first, then black is ready to meet bishop b3 with bishop e6. So bishop b3 is a nice finesse, forcing the knight to retreat first. And now bishop e3 attacking the queen, threatening d5. White has a strong lead in development. Now after bishop d2, knight c3, white has strong pressure on the center. For example, d6 is met by bishop g5, attacking the pawn on e7. And after takes, black has some problems as his queen is misplaced, and bishop e3 is a powerful threat. So after d5, bishop e7, white attacks the rook. And white is on top here because of the dangerous pass pawn on d6, and black has to defend carefully. So queen b6 is a possible move, but I don't think it's the best move for black. Let's take a look at now the move e5, which is a very solid move. And here white has a choice. You can play d3, you can capture on c6, but I'm recommending the most principled move d4. And this is a pawn sacrifice, but in return we quickly get our pieces developed, and later we can try to recapture the double pawn on the d file. So if cd, cd4, meanwhile after e takes cd4, we just transpose if black takes with the pawn. Meanwhile if black takes with the knight, then this leads to quite a different position. Because after takes, annoying for black. For example, a6, and now I like to move bishop c4, maintaining pressure on f7 and along the light squares. Bishop d6, and our control over the d6 square is very annoying, especially since we can support our bishop by advancing our e-pawn once. For example, queen b6 loses due to the very nice tactical move queen f3, when black cannot castle as the knight on e7 is hanging, and f6 e5 leads to winning attack for white. Meanwhile, after b5, white has the strong move bishop d5, attacking the rook on e8 and gaining a tempo. And if black takes on d5, then after e d5, his king is stuck on the center, and rook e1 check is unstoppable. After king f7, rook e7, the position looks extremely dangerous for black, and I won't be surprised if white finds a win here. For example, bishop b4 here, and white's initiative is extremely powerful. Black has no defense actually, because d6 is a threat. For example, after d6, takes, queen d4, and white has extremely good compensation for the exchange. For example, after a4, white has a strong initiative, thanks to the control over the dark squares and the positioning of our diagonal pieces here, knight d2, and we open up the a file, and it's very difficult to defend this with black because knight f3 is a threat and rook a7 is also a threat. So on move 6 after d4, black more normally just captures with the e-pawn, or sorry, he just captures with both pawns, and then we get this position where black's pawn on d4 is well protected at the moment, and he wants to continue his development. So we play bishop f4, eyeing up the dark squares in the center. So white is preparing to play bishop d6, where the bishop is very well placed, creating possible bind. Black cannot play d6 at the moment because after knight takes d4, his knight is pinned. So black has two choices here. a6 is the best move and the most accurate continuation. Knight g7 is not as accurate because now we can play bishop d6, and our control over the d6 square is just a bit suffocating for black. For example, after castle, knight d2, the bishop on d6 is very well placed, and in addition we can support it later by playing knight c4, bishop d3, and after b4, black is a pawn up, but white has very good compensation. The bishop on d6 is quite difficult to attack because the knight is pinned, and black cannot play rook e8, as after bishop c4, the pawn on f7 needs protection. Meanwhile, after knight a7, with the idea of knight c8, we've been following the game Niski against Ilyasov, and white has a nice bind. The threat of b5, followed by queen d3, gives white total domination over the position. Meanwhile, after a6, the difference is now we place our bishop on the active a2, g8 diagonal. So this is the difference why knight g7 is inaccurate. The point is that after b5, we have the powerful extra option of bishop d5, pinning the knight on c6. And after castle rook e1, our bishops are very well placed here, pinning both knights. Bishop b7 is met by knight d2, with the idea to continue with knight b3 next move and recapture the pawn on d4. So after knight a5, which is black's best defense, white plays rook c1, occupying the c file, and the bishop c6 is black's best move. But after knight b3, we are recapturing our pawn on d4, and after knight b7, we can take on e7, followed by rook c6. Alternatively, bishop e5 is even simpler, because we just get rid of the dark square bishops, after which black's pawns become vulnerable. Now knight c5, and black's position of the knight on e7 is quite passive. He doesn't have any squares he can go to. And meanwhile, black's dark squares are very vulnerable, and we are able to recapture the pawn on d4. And therefore black is slightly worse here. On move 8, a6 is much more accurate, because black forces the bishop, or black forces our bishop to make a decision where he wants to go. And I'm recommending bishop a4, because if you play bishop c4, black is able to play the move d6. And now we cannot play bishop d6 anymore. And cannot play bishop d6 anymore, and black wants to develop his knight. Next move, either to f6 or to e7. And black is doing well, as the line with queen b3 to attack this pawn doesn't lead anywhere after knight a5, king e7, and knight f6. And there has been some games here with the move bishop g5, beating the black king, but it is known that after knight c6, our bishop on f7 is quite stuck at the moment, and black is doing okay in this position. So after a6, we should retreat our bishop to a4, maintaining the pressure along the diagonal. The main point is that d6 cannot be played because of the pin on the c6 knight. And meanwhile, as black plays b5, bishop b3, d6 is a bit risky in this case, because after d6 we get an initiative on the queen side by playing a4, exploiting black's pawn on b5, and after rook b8, takes, white has a strong initiative after either knight g5 or knight a3, with the idea to attack black's pawn with queen d3, for example, or simply knight c2. And white is slightly preferable. So after bishop a4, black normally just develops his knight, because if he plays b5, this gives us the extra option of a4. I mean, we can play bishop d6 and transpose to the main line, but a4 is a good addition, putting pressure on black's queenside pawns. And if black plays b4, then he weakens the c4 square, which we can use for our knight. And meanwhile, black plays bishop b7, then after takes, followed by knight a3, white attacks the pawn on b5, and yeah, he's in some kind of a bind. For example, after b4, our knight just jumps to c4, where it controls the dark squares, controls all the squares, and the knight is very powerfully placed on c4. And here white has a very good position, as all our pieces are active, and in addition, queen c1 with the idea of queen f4 leaves black in certain difficulties, because our pieces are well placed and we have a bind. Meanwhile, as black plays queen b6 to protect the pawn b5, then after queen d3, again the bishop on d6 is very nicely placed. And now h4, black is not threatening anything on the queen side. Meanwhile, h5 gives us an outpost on the g5 square. After rook e1, followed by knight c2, black is a pawn up, but at the same time he is under tremendous pressure, thanks to our powerful bishops and active pieces. So on move 9, black plays knight e7, and therefore we don't get the option to attack black's queenside pawns by playing a4. And this is black's most accurate move order. White plays bishop d6, installing the bishop on d6. And then black plays b5. If black castles short before playing b5, then we can just play knight bd2. And after b5, we transpose to the main line. And so black plays b5, and then we play bishop b3. And here, actually castling short is inaccurate, because after knight b2, the knight on e7 is pinned, and black can almost never play rook e8 because we can attack the f7 pawn by knight g5. And here white is better. For example, after bishop b7, we can play e5, but I like rook c1, controlling the c file. And now black cannot play knight a5 because of bishop c7. So black is kind of in a bind here. For example, after e5, with the idea to attack our bishop, then we just play a3 in order to get the a2 square for our bishop. And here black is worse because of the bind. Queen d3 is a threat. And if black plays knight f5 to attack our bishop, then we just play bishop f4, followed by queen d3 or rook fe1. And our bishops are very active, and the pawn on b5 is also hanging. So, on move 11, black's best and most accurate move is obviously bishop b7. And the point is that black delays castling in order to prepare the move knight c8. So if we play something normal, like let's say knight b2, then black plays knight c8, and he attacks our bishop, and the bishop is forced to retreat, and after which black castles, and he is completely fine. So this position has been played in a number of games, and in this course I'm going to be recommending the move knight g5, which I believe is the most aggressive move. Fabiano Caruana played rook e1 in this position a few months ago, and it's also an interesting choice because the line becomes forcing. So again, if black castles, then after knight b2, the bishop on d6 is extremely well placed, and black is suffering. Sorry, I was just checking the recent games. So after rook e1, Magnus Carlsen played knight c8, which is the best move, attacking the bishop and forcing him to retreat or either play e5. After which black takes, and black has the bishop pair, but his king is in a very unstable position. So if white plays slowly, then white is able to, if white plays slowly, then black is able to unravel and defend his position by playing f5. Very strong move. And the idea to continue next move with bishop f6, followed by king g7. So Fabiano played h4, which is a very concrete choice. So knight g5 is a threat. Perhaps black has other moves, but bishop f6 seems more most natural. Knight bd2, king g7, white played bishop d5, pinning the knight on c6. And Magnus Carlsen played knight a5, but after takes, knight e4, he got under some sort of a bind, and he had a bad position after h5. Because the pawn on d4 is falling, the knight on b7 is attacking the pawn d6, but other than that, it's passive. Rook c8, rook c1. And white was clearly better in the game because black's king has some problems, and white can play queen d2 next move to try to regain this pawn on d4. And white has some initiative. But on move 17 after bishop d5, it's more critical to take on h4. And now black is 2 pawns up, and white has some aggressive choices here, such as knight e4. Black has to play bishop f6. Now white can try rook c1 with some compensation for the pawn. I'm not sure if it's more than enough, or if it gives more than enough other than equality. Alternatively, white can play rook e4, activating the rook this way. Bishop f6 is met by the annoying move rook f4, pinning the bishop and threatening knight e4. So basically black has to sacrifice an exchange with rook e8 and rook takes e4. But white is probably better after bishop takes e4, as black's pawns on the d file is doubled and maybe he doesn't have enough compensation for the exchange. Alternatively, black can play bishop g5 on move 18. After rook g4, black's king is a bit vulnerable though. Probably black can equalize here by playing bishop takes d2 or by playing h6, and both moves are very complex. After h6, knight e4, there are some crazy lines starting with f5, but black doesn't even have to play that move. So it's hard to say what's happening in the position after bishop takes h4. Certainly it's worth a try for white. Usually in such complex positions, the player who has the better preparation or who feels more at home in this kinds of position wins. So the moment rook e4 looks a bit dangerous for black, but after a couple of accurate moves, black should be doing okay. So yes, I don't know exactly what's happening in this variation, but it's certainly an interesting practical try for white. So in this course, my main recommendation is knight g5, but of course if you want to investigate rook e1 followed by e5, then feel free to do so, as you could catch your opponent unawares. So after h4, yeah, black has to be careful during the entire game on making sure that his king is safe. Meanwhile, after knight g5, this is my suggestion. The idea is to force black to castle. And now the knight on e7 is pinned again, and black cannot play knight c8. So we play queen f3, attacking the vulnerable f7 pawn. Black has to play queen e8 as the only move. And here the queen looks a bit funny on e8. And here white has two choices. Knight d2 is possible here, just developing the knight. The position is complex and unclear, but after h6, if black plays h6, then we just reroute our knight, and later we can play knight f4. And in this position, black has to be very accurate in order to equalize. Because, for example, if he plays the normal move queen d8, then we play queen g3. And already here, it's very difficult to defend for black, because if he doesn't do anything quickly, then we just want to push our pawn by playing f4 followed by f5. Black can try d3 to try to activate his knight this way, but nevertheless, I think white's position is preferable either after knight f4 or the immediate f4. Knight d4 threatens to fork our pieces on e2, so we played very important move king h1, and after takes, the bishop on d6 is still very active, and in addition, white simply wants to play f5 next move in attack. Therefore black has to play f5 here, or not has to, but probably should. And then white plays e5, closing off the long diagonal for the dark square bishop. Then we recapture the pawn on d3. And the position is complex, but white's position is easier to play, because after queen d3, we have some bind in the position. Meanwhile, move 15, black's best move probably here is a5, with the idea to create counterplay on the queen side by pushing his pawn. And here a4 is interesting, but alternatively queen g3, preparing f4, and after a4, bishop c2, and now bishop d3, and after rook e8, the position is complex and unclear. And actually, probably white should repeat moves now. So, yeah, knight e2 is interesting, but not enough for advantage against precise play by black after a5. So therefore I suggest queen g3, maintaining control over the d6 square. And in addition now, if black plays h6, then we can retreat the knight to f3. And that's the main difference, because in the other line, knight on h3 is quite poorly placed at the moment. And meanwhile, after queen g3, h6, we can retreat to f3. Black can play knight a5 here when we play knight d2, protecting the e4 pawn and the bishop on b3. If black takes on d3, then we just recapture with the knight. The knight c5 is coming. Meanwhile, after h6, then we play knight f3. And we get this unclear position where we can guarantee necessarily advantage for white, but the rising positions are interesting. If black takes on b3 now, getting the bishop pair, then we should actually recapture with the knight in order to take on d4 next move. Black can take on e4 because he's threatening knight f5. So we take with the f knight to the d4 square. And here black has to be accurate in order to equalize. His best move is bishop d5, with the idea to close off the e-file. But after the normal continuation, rook e1, black has to play bishop e6, and now probably rook a d1 is a nice strong move, centralizing our rooks. And here we have good compensation for the pawn, because the bishop on d6 is in an accurate position, pinning the knight on e7. For example, queen d8 here is not very desirable, as after knight takes e6, d takes e6, white plays bishop e4. And the knight on e7 is pinned, and meanwhile black cannot play queen e8. As after queen c7, followed by rook d7, the knight on e7 is pinned, and black cannot play knight d5 because of rook takes d5. So move 16 after knight gf3. White has compensation for the pawn, and black has to be precise, because otherwise we just put our rook on e1, and then we put the other rook on the d1. So in other words, we just want to centralize our rooks next, and black is under some pressure. For example, after rook c8, rook e1, white has good compensation for the pawn. For example, if black plays knight c4, attacking bishop on d6, and after takes, we have this strong move knight e5, controlling the c6 square and attacking the c4 square. c3 is met by the interesting move knight c4. When if black takes, then we just recapture on b2. And black's e7 knight is pinned, and black is under some pressure. Meanwhile, after queen d8, we can take on c3, and then we get this position where white is preferable thanks to our control over the dark squares and the blockade on d6, but certainly the position is still quite complex. So after rook fe1, maybe white has some alternatives here on move 17 that need to be checked. For example, move 17, knight e5 is also interesting to take control of the light squares. And after knight takes b3, white can recapture either way, but we can take on b3. And we are threatening to start some sort of initiative on the king side by playing f4. And the position is also quite messy. But rook e1, and now black's most natural move is queen d8, with the idea to play rook e8 and develop the rest of his pieces. And the position is complex. I suggest this, in this position I suggest the interesting novelty a3. I mean, you can also play rook a d1, but A3 is interesting because it reserves the A2 square for our bishop. So in other words, we want to play bishop A2 next move and improve our position that way. For example, if black plays rook E8, then we play bishop A2, and we keep our bishop. Next, we want to play knight E5. So then black has to play knight C4 to try to close off the diagonal. But after knight takes, b takes, white plays rook AC1. And it's not so easy to defend the pawn on C4. And black has some problems because C3 is a bad move here, as it opens up the long diagonal. And after knight E5, black's kingside pawns on F7 and G6 are vulnerable. So A3 is a nice novelty because black doesn't really want to take on B3 at the moment. As after knight takes B3, our knight gets access to the C5 square. And after the continuation, rook E8, knight C5, followed by rook AD1, white has some slight but annoying pressure. So, as you can see, both players need to be accurate here because white is a pawn down, but black is quite passive. So, the margin of error in each given position is quite high. And so both sides need to play accurately in this line. Knight C4 is possible on move 18. But after takes, bishop A2, threatening rook AC1. Black is under some pressure. For example, if he plays D3 with the idea to create counterplay in the center, then he play rook AC1, and black has to be careful because if he takes, rook takes, again the diagonal opens up, and black's kingside is under heavy pressure once again. Meanwhile, D3 seems to be the most critical move here, but at the same time it's quite risky. So D3, black activates the long diagonal, and he can take on B2 if he wants to. White has several interesting moves. Bishop A2 is interesting, leading to a very complex position. After takes, and now knight E5. And yeah, the position is very messy, but black has to be careful as his kingside becomes quite vulnerable. So this is interesting and worthy of attention. Alternatively, white can play rook AD1 or knight E5, closing the long diagonal and putting pressure on F7. After takes, knight takes. We're actually following a recent game, Pavlov against Dutra. Black played rook E8, now rook AD1, and we have active pieces. In addition, we're ready to recapture the pawn. Black has other moves here, such as the interesting move F5. But after knight C5, black's pawns are quite vulnerable. And after bishop takes E4, knight E takes D3 probably. White has very good compensation for the pawn, as black has a number of weak squares. Meanwhile, knight C6 looks most natural, but after takes, the position is quite complex and unclear. But at the same time, we have a nice bind on the dark squares in the center. Knight C5 is coming, and I prefer white. For example, after knight D4, we can take on D4, or we can play knight C5, attacking the bishop, and after takes, queen D6, queen B3, queen B7. And now white plays E5, and white has a slightly better game because black's bishop is blockaded, and our pieces are well placed. Let's now go to the main move, knight F6. This is the main line. Black attacks the pawn and develops his knight. And here, we don't advance with E5 because after E5, knight D5, D4, takes, castle. Black plays D6, next move. and finishes its development. There's been a lot of games also with this line. White plays knight c3, and now black's best move is not to take on c3, but to play knight c7, keeping the pieces on the board. And then next move, black wants to play d6, and black is probably doing completely fine here after the move rook e1. There have been some games with knight takes b5 and a6 followed by d6. Takes, and so far black is doing alright here because he has the bishop pair. Alternatively, maybe d6 on move 11 is also completely fine for black. So in this course, I'm going to be recommending rook e1, just protecting the pawn on e4. And if black plays a6, this is not very accurate, as after takes, followed by h3. White prevents bishop g4, and we are preparing to occupy the center. Next move by playing d4. After castle d4, white has a stable setup, and we are ready to play knight c3. So black should play c5 here, immediately challenging our center. But nevertheless, after d5, with the idea of knight c3, black is still under some pressure. b5 is met by knight c3, developing our pieces, and bishop f4, and white has nice play. After bishop e5, we pin the knight on f6, and our center is secure on the d5 and e4 squares. And in the game Gierden against Rudenko, after knight h2 and a3, securing our pawns, white has a nice and stable advantage. After bishop f4, and now knight g4, and turns out black's dark squares on the king side are quite vulnerable, as our bishop is well placed, and knight b3 doesn't work very well here, as white plays queen f4, threatening queen e5, starting an attack the king side. So white is slightly better. The main move is knight f6. The main move of knight f6 is to castle move 6, e1. And here white has several options. h3 is possible here, just a slow prophylactic move, preventing any bishop g4 ideas, and waiting to see what black does in the center. But d4 is what I'm recommending in the course. Maybe h3 is an interesting alternative, but it remains to be seen whether white can gain the advantage after e5 or black's usual response, queen b6. Queen b6 attacks the bishop and takes control of the d4 square. So right now I'm focusing on the move d4, and black's main response is d5, creating counterplay in the center. The move queen b6 is a rare alternative, but of course we need to know how to meet this move. White can play bishop c4, just occupying the center, but taking on c6 looks interesting to me. So after d takes c6, we play h3, a nice prophylactic move, preventing bishop g4. And after rook d8, queen c2, the position of our knight on f3 is secure, as black no longer has bishop g4. And after takes, our center is secure, and white has a stable position. For example, knight e8 is met by the accurate move bishop g5, attacking the e-pawn. Rook d7 looks very ugly to me, and after knight bd2, the idea to protect the center, or to play knight c4. If black takes on d4, then after takes, white white has very good compensation for the pawn because black's dark squares are weak. And in addition, rook ad1 is coming, and the black still needs to finish its development on the queen side. On move 7, black can take on d4 first, followed by d5, when in some lines we transpose to the main line. a6 doesn't work very well because we just retreat our bishop. And if black plays d6, then again we play h3, typical move, taking away the g4 square from black's pieces. Meanwhile, after d5, e5, our pieces are well placed, and now we play the nice strong move knight c3, because if black takes, then he only helps us secure our pawn chain here. Meanwhile, bishop g4 is playable. We can take the pawn on e4, for example, but I like bishop e3, just taking control of the e4 square, or sorry, the d4 square, takes, and we get this position where our pawn structure in the center is secure, and we can even play h3 here, and white is slightly better thanks to the powerful lines for bishop, the secure center pawns. And in addition, we have an easy plan of advancing our h-pawn by playing h4 followed by h5. So, on move 7, on move 8 after d5, e5, knight e4, here white can play the extra option of knight c3, which leads to a different kind of position. But basically after, if black takes on c3, then this pawn structure is in white's favor because our center is secure. And if we can play bishop d3, then we will have a nice stable advantage. But in this position, I suggest instead just limiting our study and taking on c6, followed by bishop e3, and we transpose to the main line, unless under 75. So let's now take a look at d5. So black counter attacks in the center, and the main point is that e takes d5 leads nowhere after queen takes d5. When black's pieces are active and he's doing well, because if you take on c6, queen takes rook e7, capturing this pawn is too greedy, and it can be refuted by bishop e6, threatening knight d5. So after d5, I suggest e5, and black's knight jumps to the e4 square, and we get this, we get the critical position of the variation. The point of our plan is that black's bishop on g7 is quite passive at the moment, as he is being blockaded by our center pawns. But black's knight on e4 is quite active, and later he wants to create counterplay in the center by playing f6. So this line is also quite topical, has been played in quite a number of games in the high level, and yeah, in this position actually white has a choice. White has a choice between two equally good moves, and I'll mention both of them. In this course, I'm going to be recommending the immediate capture with bishop takes c6. But white has another very good alternative here, and that is to move 9 bishop e3. And this can transpose to the line I'm recommending, but it can also not. So the main difference is that after bishop e3, black can play queen b6, attacking our bishop. And after taking on c6, black gets the extra interesting option of queen takes c6, which he doesn't have in the other line. But maybe white is a little better here after d takes c5, but I don't exactly know. There have only been a couple of games in this position. I believe Daniel Debo played bishop g4 here, in this position. Yeah, the game Daniel Vichy Anand versus Daniel the Book. Black played bishop g4. And after knight bd2, he took on d2. And maybe queen takes d2 is interesting here, but Vichy took on d2 with the bishop. And after queen takes c5, black was able to get a solid position and later on equalize. Although, yeah, black's position is very solid. In addition, on move 11, black can take on c5 right away also. When white cannot play knight bd2 because black has knight d3 attacking both pawns. So the position is quite unclear, and I prefer to avoid this line. Therefore, I recommend taking on c6 right away, and after takes, then we play bishop e3. So bishop e3 is an important move because it secures the dark squares here on the d4 and c5 squares, and in addition it protects the f2 pawn, and so it's just a good move all around. And here black has several choices. He can take on d4, followed by f6, or alternatively he can play queen b6, or he can take on d4 followed by queen b6. So let's take a look at all of them. Black can play rook b8 when he attacks our pawn, when we meet this with the move queen c1. So queen c1 is slightly stronger than b3 because it doesn't weaken the c3 pawn, and in addition, after queen c1 we are threatening to take on c5. In addition, we just want to develop our knight by playing knight bd2. So after takes, we transpose to the main line with c takes d4 on move 10. So c takes d4, c takes d4. Here black can play queen b6, which when we play queen c1, this can also transpose from the line queen b6, queen c1, and if black takes on d4, then after c takes d4, we transpose. So there's quite a bit of transposition. After cd4, black has a choice. He can let's take a look at his possible options in this position. After rook b8, white plays queen c1, controlling the dark squares on the queen side and preparing knight bd2. So if black plays bishop f5, then we play knight bd2, challenging the position of the knight on the e4 square. Black can try f6, creating counterplay in the center. But after takes, the move here, queen takes c6, is actually very interesting and quite powerful. The point is that after takes, we make the play more concrete. And in addition, after rook b2, we have the nice move knight b3, cutting off the black rook along the b file. And in addition, our knight will be very well placed on c5. So rook f7 is met by knight c5, and our knight is well placed here. The bishop on g7 is quite passive at the moment. In the game, black played rook e7, and white replied bishop f4, threatening to play bishop d6, winning control over the e file, queen a4, and black is close to equality. In one game, black played h5, with the idea to advance his pawns, but white responded with h4, preventing black from expanding further. And after g5, bishop d2, followed by bishop b4. White has some pressure as our minor pieces are well placed, and after queen b3, followed by queen f3, we attack the bishop on f5, and after queen takes d5, black is a pawn down and has to prove compensation for the lost pawn. In addition, on queen a4, black can play bishop f8 instead, protecting the rook on e7. But now we can either play h4 to gain space on the king side, or alternatively just h3 just making a loss for our king. And white is a little bit better here because our knight is powerfully placed on c5, and our knight on c5 is stronger than black's bishop on f5, but it's just a playable position. On move 11, c5 doesn't work because after d takes c5 we just win a pawn. And yeah, black has some problems here. For example, bishop g4 doesn't work because of h3, and if takes, g takes. And black's knight on e4 is trapped, and this works very well for white because bishop e5 here doesn't work as we simply play knight d2. Black loses material. He doesn't have enough compensation for the two pieces. Black can play d4, but after queen takes d4, we exchange the queens. So now, after that trade of queens, our king's position is vulnerable, but black cannot really start an attack against it because the queens are gone. And after knight d2, black is 2 pawns down. Rook d8 is met by bishop e3 when white wins. Black can take this pawn, but after king f1, white is a pawn up, and our queenside pawns are rolling and well protected. Bishop e3, and now knight c4, followed by rook ad1. Alternatively, white can also play rook ad1 here, and it's even slightly stronger. The main point is that after knight c4, we have an even number of pawns. At the moment, black was able to regain his sacrifice pawn, but the main problem is that our queenside pawns are ready to push and advance, and meanwhile the knight on h3 is quite misplaced. So black is actually close to losing in this end here. On move 11, as I said, black can play queen b6 to attack the b2 pawn. But again, we play queen c1, which is a typical move, controlling the dark squares on the queen side. If black plays rook b8 here, then we play b3, protecting the b pawn. And next we're ready to play knight c3. For example, here knight c3, threatening knight a4, or knight takes e4. And white achieves the plan of setting up a dark squared blockade on the queen side. For example, after takes, white is slightly better. After bishop f4, activating the dark squared bishop and transferring it to the d6 square. And white has a small advantage thanks to the active bishop on c5. And also black's queenside pawns are quite weak as a7 is isolated. And after rook e1, black is solid, but at the same time, white is slightly better. We're threatening queen a6, so probably black should play bishop c8 to try to protect the pawn on e7, when white can try g4. With the idea to gain space on the king side and improve the position of our knight. And yeah, black should probably be able to hold this position, but it's a bit uncomfortable. So after queen c1, a5 is a lot more common. And black's idea is to gain space on the queen side by pushing his a-pawn. And here white has two good moves. Knight fd2 is interesting here, challenging the position of the knight on e4. And after takes, followed by knight c3, white gets a blockade on the dark squares. For example, after bishop f5, white plays h3, with the idea to attack the bishop and force him away from the active b1h7 diagonal. And after g4, the bishop has to retreat, as if he goes to e4, then after takes, and queen c2, we capture one of these pawns, and black has insufficient compensation for it. He can play bishop c8, but now white plays rook ab1, just protecting the b2 pawn. and rook c1, and the position is quite complex, but white has a dark square bind. For example, in this position, we can play rook c2 to protect the pawn and prepare the doubling of the rooks. And both sides have chances here, but white is possibly slightly better, because we just improved the position of our pieces by playing rook bc1 next move, and yeah, black doesn't have much counterplay in this position. But on move 13, besides knight fd2, knight c3 is the main move. Attacking the knight on e4, and if black ignores it, then we take and attack this pawn. And after bishop f5, white can play h3. And this pawn on e4 is in trouble. For example, after rook fb8, b3 takes, and knight takes, and black is slightly worse because knight c5 is coming, and the pawn on e4 is doubled and requires constant protection. So on move 13 after knight c3, black should probably just take on c3, because otherwise white could take on e4 or can play knight a4. So black should probably just take, and then we take with the queen. Because if we take with the b pawn, then black can play bishop g4, and later his bishop can always retreat to the f5 square and take control of the b file. So after knight takes c3, we take with the queen, and then we get this position that can arise quite often in this variation. So black has a bishop pair, but the bishop on g7 is passive at the moment, and we have control over the dark squares. So it remains to be seen if black can equalize completely in this position. He has several moves here. He can play bishop g4 when white plays knight d2 to keep the knight, and b3, and this position is a little better for white because white has control over the dark squares. For example, after bishop f5, h3 is a typical plan here, with the idea to play g4 and force the black bishop to retreat, because the bishop on f5 is very active, controlling the light squares. So after g4, rook ab1, white anticipates the possible opening of the b file, and after queen a6, knight f1, white has a bind because a4 can always be met by b4, closing the queen side. Meanwhile, after queen c8, knight g3, black has no counterplay, and white has time to improve the position of his knight. And after a4, b4, black got a very bad position because of this blockade by our pawns. So let's see, after knight c3, queen takes c3. Actually on move 16 in one game, black played a4. I faced this move in the online Olympian against a strong grandmaster from Peru, Emilio Cordova. And after a4, I took on a4. And if black takes on a4 with the rook, then he has a problem along the b file after rook eb1, and he's going to lose a pawn. So in the game he played bishop f5, and I played rook ac1, which was a mistake, as black was able to head into an endgame where he wins this pawn, and he is able to equalize after, So on move 17 after bishop f5, black takes control of the b1 square, but white actually has this very strong reply, knight b3, which I totally underestimated, but the idea is to bring the knight to the powerful c5 square, after which it controls a lot of squares, and it also closes down the position. So after rook c4, white just plays queen d2, and we are ready to push the a pawn. Meanwhile, after rook c2, white just plays queen d1, and the knight on c5 is powerful. It plays a4 is a threat, and in addition, after queen b2, besides the move a4, white can even play rook b1, heading off to an endgame where white has some edge thanks to the fact that the knight on c5 is very well placed, and h5 a4 is clearly better. Meanwhile, rook takes a2 is not possible because of the trick rook b8 and g4, and we attack the bishop on f5 and we win a piece. So white should be better after queen d2 thanks to our active knight on c5. Meanwhile, move 14, black can also play bishop f5, taking controls to light squares on the queen side, and this is a more common move. After which I suggest the interesting move h3, preparing to play g4 in order to keep the enemy bishop away from the active diagonal. So this is a typical plan because black doesn't want to play h5 as this weakens the g5 square, and then we can start an attack on the king side as now black's pawns are vulnerable. Alternatively, here on move 15, white can start first with the move b3 to secure the b file and protect the b pawn, and after the common move rook is b8, then we can play h3, again threatening g4, after which we transpose to the main line. So h3, rook fb8, and now we play b3, and we are ready to advance with g4 next move. So black should play a4 to try to create counterplay on the queen side, and then we play g4, kicking the enemy bishop away from the active f5 square, and also gaining some space. Black cannot play bishop e4 as after knight d2, the bishop could be trapped. And so he retreats the bishop either to e6 or to d7. But let's take a look at bishop d7. And here white has several options. For example, rook eb1 is an interesting option here. The idea is that after a takes, we can actually take with the rook, and then we get a passed pawn on the a file after rook takes b8, followed by a4. White has some small initiative here, thanks to the passed a pawn, but black should probably hold with accurate play. So I analyzed king g2 instead, which might not be the best move, but white just wants to improve the position of the king on the king side and protect the pawns on h3 and g4. So if takes, rook a1, black cannot win a pawn as he cannot take on b3 because he's got background problems starting with rook a8. So black plays bishop f8, and here white has several options. Queen c1 is an interesting option with the idea to trade off dark squared bishops, and for example after queen takes, white can play bishop h6, trading off the dark squared bishops, and black is a pawn down. But white has good compensation thanks to the dark square control. Alternatively, white can play bishop f4 first, and now after queen c1, we are actually threatening e6 with some activity. And here I think white has good compensation for the pawn. For example, after bishop e6, we play bishop h6, attacking black's dark squares, and after the retreat queen b7, bishop takes f8, rook takes f8, white is a pawn down, but we have an outpost on the c5 square, and after the interesting move rook a3, with the idea to pile up the pressure on the c file, white has very good compensation for the pawn, but remains to be seen whether it's enough for an advantage or not. Move 18, black can play queen b7, but this runs into bishop f4, hitting the rook on b8 and threatening e6, winning material. Meanwhile, after e6, then his dark squares on the board become quite vulnerable. After bishop f8, we have b4, which is a very nice pawn sacrifice, because after takes, queen e3, the bishop on b4 is pinned. The bishop on d7 is passive, and white gets very strong compensation for the pawn. And now after queen c8, we can consider h4, with the idea to attack. Alternatively, the rook sacrifice, or the exchange sacrifice, with bishop g5. This also looks very dangerous for black, because h4, h5 is coming, and bishop f6 also. And I believe this position is quite difficult to defend for black. But move 23, probably h4 is also more than good enough, with the idea to just advance the h pawn forward. So move 11, besides queen b6, f6 is a solid option here, trying to create counterplay. But we play knight bd2, fighting for control over the e4 square, and also on the dark squares. And after takes, we take with the queen, because we are unable to take with the knight, as the pawn on e5 needs protection. And here black has very good counterplay, so we take with the queen. And the point is now after fe5, obviously we're captured with the knight, and therefore black has to play bishop g4 to try to get rid of our knight on f3. Then we apply e takes f6, e takes f6. Black had to recapture with the e pawn. And now black is going to capture our knight on f3 next move. But that's not the end of the story. We play bishop h6, trading off the dark squared bishops. And we get the simplified position where white is a bit better. For example, if he takes and takes, it might seem like black is super solid, and he is. But after king g2, we are still slightly, he still has some problems. For example, after rook e8, white plays b4, and yeah, black has some small problems with his king, and he has also some small problems with the queenside pawns, so he has to be accurate. And after rook e8, rook c1 is very strong, keeping a pair of rooks. Our king on g2 is very safe actually. Black has no checks. And after rook e6, we need to followed by rook c5. Black's queenside pawns are quite vulnerable, and we can pile up the pressure by playing rook a5 in the near future. So black has some problems here. Meanwhile, on move 15, it's probably more accurate after bishop takes, g takes, to not take on h6. Because in the last variation, our queen was very aligned on h6. So probably queen d7 is stronger. But again, king g2, black has no checks on our king. We prevent black from playing queen h3. So after rook e8 takes, rook ac1, white can also start with the move b4 first to take control of the squares on the queen side. But rook ac1 is nice, because if black takes on e1, then we can take with the queen. And after rook e8, queen d2, we get this position where black seems to have no problems at all on first sight. And yeah, for sure he can hold with accurate play. But at the same time, we have an outpost on the c5 square. We are ready to play b4 and advance to the queen side. So black needs to be accurate here to draw the game. Meanwhile, white's not risking anything at all. Meanwhile, after rook c8, again takes, and we reach this position where white has a small but stable advantage as rook c5 is coming. So move 10, c takes d4 is one of the main moves, queen b6 is another, and again we play queen c1. And if black takes, we transpose to the main line. Meanwhile, black can play c4, and this move has been played in a number of games. So this move looks a bit weird, but because black closes down the queen side, and he does not fight for control over the center, but the point is now black wants to activate his slice squared bishop very quickly by playing bishop f5. So after knight bd2, black takes on d2, because if he plays bishop f5, white gets the extra option of knight h4, kicking the black bishop backwards. And so if he takes, then it's very important to recapture with the knight, and that way we can close the b file by playing b3. So now for p8 we just go b3, no problem. So black's idea is in this line is to play bishop f5 quickly and install the bishop on the active d3 square. But we can't really prevent that, so we just play b3. If black takes with the c pawn, then we can just recapture with either way. But taking with the knight is also strong because we get the outpost on c5 later on. So bishop d3 is the best move. And the bishop is well placed here. So in this position I suggest h4, which is quite important actually. And the idea is just to start an attack quickly on the king side before black can do anything on the queen side. So after h4, h5 has been played when in the game Bosnia against Loeffler. After queen a3, white has some pressure attacking the pawn. And after e6 takes, white has the interesting move d5, hitting the black queen and forcing the play in the center. And after queen d8, white takes on e6, and this is the main point. And after f takes e6, white plays the accurate move bishop g5. Black's pawns are quite vulnerable on the entire board. So after queen d5, bishop f6 takes, white sacrifices a pawn, but in return after rook e3, followed by knight f3. Turns out white has very good compensation as all of black's pawns are weak and isolated, and meanwhile our king side is secure thanks to the active rook on e3. So h5 is interesting, but I believe white can pose some pressure after queen a3, especially after the accurate b5 with the idea to take on e6. Next. So on h4, a5 is possible, then we can continue on with our attack, the king side, alternatively queen d1, again threatening h5. Maybe the point is that if we play the immediate h5, black can consider taking, and after queen d1, he can try to defend the pawn on h5 later on by playing bishop g6, but this idea seems quite weird to me. But queen d1 seems to be more accurate because we want to play h5 next move. And after a4, take on c4, followed by h5, and white gets annoying pressure on the queen side. For example, h6, limiting the squares of black's bishop and the king. Rook c1, followed by queen g4. And the position remains complex and both sides have chances, but white is threatening to play bishop g5 next move, followed by queen h4, putting pressure on black's e7 pawn and forcing him to defend accurately. So the position is complex, but black's king has some weak squares, and our pawn on h6 is very strongly placed, controlling a lot of squares. So c4 is an interesting try here when both sides have to be precise. Rook b8 is playable, looking for counterplay along the b file. And after b3, black can play queen a5. This has been played in some games. So I don't think it's enough for equality though. So black's idea is to take on b3, rook takes b3, making use of the pin on the a file. Here knight bd2 is possible. In the end I analyze d takes c5, and black has to take on b3 to recapture the pawn, and queen a1. So black has recaptured the pawn and traded off a pair of rooks. In addition, black has a bishop pair, but white plays b4, and his queen is in danger of getting trapped. For example, a5 is a bad move here because of the reply knight b4, threatening the pawn while also threatening knight b3, and after takes, c takes b4, the pawn on c6 is hanging. In addition, f3 is a powerful threat, with the idea to encircle the knight on e4. So after b4, black has to play the accurate move, queen a4, and this move has been played in the game Fabiano Caruana against Daniel Dubov. And in the game, Fabiano played knight d4, which is an interesting move. But after bishop takes e5, f3, the knight retreats, and Fabiano played queen a3, takes, and we got this position where white is better, but it's not exactly clear how much. Daniel played rook e8, and later on he wasn't able to hold the game because of the consistent pressure applied by white, by Fabiano. So, but at this point, white certainly is slightly better. He has very good compensation for the pawn. But at the same time, black is very solid and he can set up a blockade. So I'm not exactly sure whether white has anything substantial, but certainly playable. So instead I suggest knight bd2, developing the knight and planning to play queen b2 followed by rook a1. So black plays a5, and here queen b2 is possible, with the idea to keep queens on the board and follow that up with rook a1 when white seems to be a bit better. Alternatively, you can also play queen a1, heading into an endgame, forcing the trade of queens. And after takes, knight c3, rook takes a5. This endgame looks better for white visually because we have a solid blockade on the dark squares, and we may also use the d4 square as a launching pad for our knights. So for example, after knight b5, knight b3, our knights are ready to jump to the d4 square. Meanwhile, after bishop b7, planning to play rook a8 to trade a pair of rooks. Then white plays knight b3, and black plays rook a8, again trading rooks. And then we play bishop d4, securing the dark squares and after knight b5, g3. The endgame is slightly better for white because we have a bind on the dark squares and control over the e5 and a5 squares. But yeah, at the same time, black is very solid, so the likely result of this game is a draw. But we can continue to apply pressure, and black has to defend accurately. So yeah, it's hard to say exactly where white's best chances lie. In addition, here on move 21, besides bishop d4, white can also play h4, which is actually a decent move, because if black plays h5, then he loses control over the g5 square, and we can just improve the position of our king. Meanwhile, if black plays king f8, then white can play g4, with the idea to improve the position of our king on the king side and gain some space on that side. So yeah, at the moment as it stands, white is very slightly better in this line. So we'll wait and see for further updates or possible games. So we finished this line, the main line against the Rossolimo with G6. To conclude with, I'm recommending C3 with the idea of D4, and here black's two best moves are either knight f6 or e5, when both sides have very interesting play, and white doesn't necessarily get an advantage in every single line, but I'm just aiming to try to get you guys a position where you're more familiar than with the rising position than your opponent, and hopefully the position is easier to play. But I believe I had some interesting lines against both e5 and knight f6 in this video that can pose black some small problems. So thanks for watching again this video, and good luck in your games, and I'll see you in the next one.